If you haven't noticed, it's a little different setup this morning than normal. I guess I should maybe begin with that. I'm always excited when we get a chance to sit down and have a conversation with Bill. You know, we've been talking about how our mission statement, our vision statement is to live out of being loved by God, and how sometimes that's not always the easiest thing to do. And one of the people that has helped me grow a lot in learning how to live out of being loved by God has been Bill. Partly just because of his own love for me and just acceptance of me and being able to live in that friendship. And he just, you know, sometimes you need skin on Jesus to be able to really understand what it is we're talking about. And so Bill's been that guy for me a lot of times, and I'm so grateful for him and you and your friendship.
Yeah, man. Well, it's the same coming back. So, and with all the time that Jeff has spent with me for the last, 16?
Probably.
He still hasn't pulled out his ventriloquist dummy. So,
I
not
you
even
just did
I
right
can,
there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Some people here. We're just moving on. We're not even going. We're not going there. There are probably a few people here who don't really know who you are or what you do. So could you maybe just give a little synopsis of what you do for your profession? And
yeah, I'm kind of a goofball, to be honest, a little bit different. But I love working with people. I love working with trauma. And I think one of the things that was really impactful for me just growing up and going through crazy stuff is I had people really guide me, really wise people guide me and love me. And, you know, I got married to somebody pretty amazing, and there are people and experiences in my life, especially Christ coming into my life, that just made me want to give back. So sometimes Christy will look at me and say, I don't really even know how you do that. And I don't know either, other than I just feel a lot of gratitude. I think as I get older, I feel less important, more valuable, you know, just because I'm loved so deeply. So it's part of why I'm up here to talk.
you like working with trauma.
I do, yeah.
So maybe give a little more definition for us of, I feel like your understanding of what trauma is maybe different than comes to mind. At least when I first started talking to you, I had a very different idea of what trauma was.
Yeah, like not getting your Starbucks order right is not trauma.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
There's some dudes that are a lot smarter than me that talk about trauma. I kind of have my own working definition, but Besser van der Kolk is one of the preeminent trauma specialists in the world. He defines it as an event that overwhelms the central nervous system, altering the way that we process and recall memory. Trauma is not the story of something that happened back then. It is the current imprint of that pain, horror, fear living inside people. Another one of the people I really respect, his name's Gabriel Mate. He said, trauma is a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically, that then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. It pains you, and now you're acting out of pain. It induces fear, and now you're acting out of fear. Trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And when I've been doing this for almost 20 years, so, that it's interesting to have those definitions, because one of the things that really enables me to work with people is my belief in Jesus. And this trauma is God's domain. It's also, He designed the body in a particular way to protect us, so that when things happen that circuit breaker clicks, just to get us through a particular thing. It's not a bad thing that happens. That actually helps us get through it. It's really that part where we're not able to connect to who we are or do the things that we wanted to do in the face of those things that were causing us to respond that way, that become the most painful. And Christ is not unfamiliar with trauma. Christ is not unfamiliar with experiencing the things that we experience. And so I take a lot of hope in knowing that the person of Christ and the people that he has enabled to work with that stuff and the way that he interacts with the human body is his domain. So there's a reality and a hope there that goes above and beyond what the human experiences. But he designed it so he can undo it, is how I think about it. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't believe that were true. It'd probably be better just to drink Jack Daniels.
Do you, in your understanding of trauma, see it as something that everybody has a level of trauma, or is it, do you just think of the big tragedies or really horrific experiences? How widespread do you feel like trauma?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about trauma from the beginning, the fall is traumatic, right? So then you look at like individual experiences, and this is interesting in Christian circles because I think a lot of times what is put up front are the people with really horrible stories. But when I think about trauma, I think about harm. And so you can look at someone who's been through something horrific and go, oh my gosh, Jesus is really working in that person's life. You might have somebody that was just maybe ignored as a child, and that's equally traumatic, but it just doesn't look as terrible, painful. So I don't think we should exonerate those things in terms of pain, because each person's pain is the hardest thing to deal with, right? So I also think that God is just so humble and lowly to come into those places and meet us wherever we are. So we live in a broken world. We live in broken families. We come to broken churches, right? So there's nothing about this world that isn't touched by that. So not everything that we experience is traumatic. It's kind of a buzzword in society right now. But trauma is really defined and really recognizable by the way that the body responds. And so when you have that fight, flight, freeze, scream kind of response, when you can't develop, when you can't function well, when you can't relate the way that you want to, when you don't feel close to Christ because of that layer that creates, then that's where you can really, define where trauma actually occurred, right?
Yeah.
So
where I want to go with this morning is talk a little bit as we're saying. Our vision is to live out of being loved by God, and this point of interference that sometimes our trauma can bring to make it challenging for us to actually live there. And I thought we could read a couple incidents from the life of Peter, maybe as a little example that then we could bounce off of. And there were two incidents came to mind that are very familiar to most of us, but I just want to revisit them briefly, and then we'll see where they lead us. But when Jesus first met Peter is the first time we see him kind of struggling to live out of being loved. It says, one day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." You can almost see Peter kind of biting his tongue here and going. Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night, haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." So here Christ does this amazing thing for him, and he just can't even receive it. And the other incident that came to mind is really towards the end of their time together on earth at the Last Supper, where it said Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And then Jesus had to say that's not necessary. But you get in both cases where Christ is offering something to Peter, and he just can't receive it. We said a couple weeks ago when we were talking about living out of being loved, how it shows up in all these other things. We're going to love God back. We're going to be able to love ourselves well. We're going to love others freely. But there are so many other places that we end up living instead. And I think especially trauma can cause us to live out of some of these other places. I think for Peter, it was either maybe guilt and shame or fear. Anyway, any thoughts that you had just revisiting Peter or his experience?
I love how we do this. Like when you and I riff, this is really fun. So the first story, I hadn't really thought about this, but I was thinking about the way that trauma affects the body. So if you give me a little room, I'll just kind of tell a story right now. So I learned this through my dad's suicide, actually. And when you grow up with someone who appears a particular way or is trying to do something with a lot of effort, you also get, my dad was suicidal his whole life. The interesting thing about it was that I could see this part of him that was really like beautiful, young, connected, right? But it felt like he couldn't get to it a lot. So there was a lot of numbing and addiction and violence and different kinds of things. But what it made me realize is that when there's trauma, and he had a boatload of trauma, it created this layer for him. And it was like this guilt, shame, anxiety on top, fear, pain, lostness, sadness underneath it. And so the reason I think my dad actually took his life is he couldn't break through that layer. So a lot of times when we experience trauma, it creates literally a layer that cuts us off from who we are in some ways. And if that happens really young, that's why I think Christ talks about bearing crosses and dying to ourselves, different things that require us to acknowledge and maybe step into the pain that we've experienced, right? Jesus already dwells in that place. It's just that we have a disconnection there. So it became very clear to me that the way that the body and the brain respond sometimes, I think, incapacitate our connection to ourselves. When we can't get to ourselves, it's then hard to die to ourselves. It's hard to offer ourselves. And so what I find there is a lot of people are working really hard for Jesus. They're trying to empty themselves when they don't even possess themselves in the first place. It's a super sad reality because what they're actually perpetuating is what they've grown up with. A sense that I can't be myself, I can't connect to myself. But it's amazing because I think that, because Christ is humble, because it's his loving kindness, because it's his grace, it's this really ironic, terrible kind of hell that a lot of people live in, is that they want to receive it, and yet there's something in their body that prevents that. So they know rationally in their mind, they know the theology, they've been in church forever, and they're wondering why they're not experiencing that abundance. I'm not saying I experience that abundance all the time, come home, like I have my frustrations and weird stuff that I do, but the reality is I'm actually able to connect to that hope because I can connect to the value that I was created in. I think one of the most painful things that we experience is being disconnected from that. And that's part of my calling in working with people, is helping them reconnect to that. I think Jesus does that. I just think I get to watch, basically. So I don't know if that makes any sense. So in that first example, what makes zero sense is to throw the net to the other side. They've been doing it all night. But I think what God is actually inviting him into is like, you have to do something different, right? Not only in the relationship with him, but it doesn't make sense to your brain and body to do this particular thing because it feels unsafe, because you know it already, because you already know how it's going to turn out. Yeah. So I just think the response that he has after that is his own humanity, realizing that he's in the presence of God, but also shame in terms of I'm worthless, right? You shouldn't be pursuing me. There's things that I've done or said that go beyond what you can redeem. And that's what I like to hunt down and chase in people. Yeah. If you can follow the shame and guilt and self-contempt, that's where the healing is, right underneath that.
What do you make of his, in the second story, flipping from that shame to the over the top of going, oh, everything, do that sort of.
Well, I think I'm like that. Like, I feel like, well, if you come home, all my kids are like, whoa. I'm pretty passionate, right? So I can be one way and then just bap and go the other. But where I really resonate with him is here, and then, when Jesus meets him after the denial. I think God's inviting him back to his body. Like, it's one thing to have Jesus out here as a rational reality, but that's not powerful enough, right? I think he's putting hands on him. I think he's engaging him in a way that's visceral, which I think that Christ wants that kind of relationship with us, like to feel him, not just to know him in our head. And then I think when he's asking him 3 times, I think he's trying to get him out of his brain again. Like he's trying to bring him back to his body. There's all kinds of theological constructs there. And I know them, but I just don't necessarily, that's not what impressed me. It's like, oh, he's like, do you really love me? And getting beyond, yeah, I do, to, yeah, I do. Yeah. I don't know if that makes any sense.
You said earlier that the trauma responses that we have when we're dealing with something extreme or something that's painful, you said that those are from God, and I'm wondering if you could unpack that a little bit more, because sometimes I think we just have shame even around our responses because they feel like, we know that they're, or we feel like they've outgrown their usefulness or whatever. But I'm curious to hear more about how they're of the Lord.
Yeah, and this gets messy because I'm not saying the trauma that people experience is
right. No,
Jesus is going around hurting people. I kind of think about it like kind of like a raft. Like if you're experiencing something that's overwhelming, then you need something to float on, right? So God's basically giving you something to float on. The reality is that we need that to float so we don't drown. So it's just for a time, right? So I think God is gracious enough to get us through overwhelming, painful things so that we just don't break, right? And some people break, which is awful, right? I'm not sure why some people are more resilient. I'm not sure why that happens. I can't speak to that. But I think what happens is I like what you said, like the raft outlives its usefulness because the raft is designed to survive a particular thing. And then life is not about being on the raft. Life is about transferring the raft off the raft back on into life, right? That's the hardest transition I think that we make because we know the raft, we know how it works, we know the outcomes. And that's your brain telling you like, hey, let's stay safe.
Yeah.
Which is super necessary,
Yeah.
right? But to get off the raft means what? I have to be vulnerable. I have to be open again.
Yes.
I could get hurt. I was stupid for the last time I got hurt, right? We do all that kind of thing. And so there's many people that live in the Christian faith as just agnostic or atheist because the reality is, good, I'm just waiting for this to be over. I'm waiting to go home. The world's going to burn. But Jesus didn't do that. Like, that's not what he's trying to invite us into. It's abundant life. It's being in the vine. So how does that figure with the raft, right?
Right.
And so that's where, through working with people, through my own work, where I was realizing, it's safe to get off the raft. Not safe in the sense that I'm not going to get hurt again.
Right.
But if I stay here, I'll die.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So survival, some people live in that for the rest of their life. Yeah. And they live a half life.
Yeah.
We're not designed to stay there, though some people do. I think there's a adventure, a life, a calling, a passion, a desire that trauma response doesn't know anything about.
Yeah.
So your brain is only trying to limit you because it's trying to protect you. It's doing its job.
Yeah.
But the soul, where the wound is, right? Man, if we can access that and allow that to heal, then the brain and body can work together again.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what I was thinking, so often what I think about with trauma is that it's something to be overcome or moved past. And which I think is partly what some of these responses are for, is to protect us, like you said, from it, be that raft. But it's actually when we can accept the vulnerability of it that Christ can actually do something with it and meet us there with that healing.
And usually that sucks. That feels awful.
Right.
Like the vulnerability feels terrible.
Yeah.
Because what the brain is saying is, well, here it comes again.
Yeah.
And if I'm stupid to open this up again, I'm going to get hurt the same way, right?
Right.
Our family is experiencing particular things right now. And you want to protect yourself. You just want to, shame yourself or get angry or... Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with being angry, but am I going to allow myself to change, right?
Right.
Or am I going to just go further into my protection, right?
Yeah.
Further into,
Yeah. I was thinking just this week, even I have this really old narrative in my head about some things around being a pastor and gathering with other pastors that had maybe I've talked about a few times, but I went and I had this pastor gathering I was at this week, and I came away from it, and we talked about it ahead of time. I haven't talked to you since, but I almost didn't go because it just brings up stuff for me, and then I came away from this one though, and I realized that my 20-year-old narrative that I've been telling myself, it's not the same form. I didn't need it anymore, and to go, I don't have to hang on to this, because it feels like this safety of a defense of not, but it was actually really kind of freeing afterwards to go, I don't have to hang on to that as much anymore. So I was grateful for that.
And just to speak to that, not everybody's ready to do that. Not everybody's ready to...
Well, I didn't think I was, actually.
Yeah, I know. I thought you were. But, and it's cool to see the outcome. Sometimes there are certain things that click out for people that are necessary. So you don't just go opening and tearing into that box, right? And until you're ready. And there's a kindness and a curiosity, an awareness and empathy and a community that needs to surround you if you're going to deal with a soul wound. You don't just run in there. And I've seen a lot of people do that unkindly and injure themselves more. So it's just imperative that you have people around you that love you. You have relationships with others, and that you have wise people around you as you go into that place of your pain. It's one of the deepest things that we carry is the pain that we carry, right? So we need to know that other people are there. We also know that no one else can fix it. That's what I was saying. Like, I don't feel that significant. Like, God's doing a thing. I don't feel that important. I just feel valuable in the process, right? Because I'm being loved, and he's loving someone, and I get to be a part of that. Christ's love is powerful enough to hold you while you do that, but you also need people with skin on. And I think he's designed it that way. So, yeah.
If somebody, and we maybe will open this up to a couple questions here in a minute, but if somebody's been on a raft long enough that that's what's comfortable and it's protecting them and it's keeping them safe, and maybe they're just becoming aware that there's some deeper pain underneath, what would be, I don't know, some things to look for, or as far as to be curious about and aware that maybe there's more to begin to explore and unpack here?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think one of the things that I love about working with people is people are really intuitive, and God's pursuing us like crazy. So there's a sense of actually making this more simple. I think trauma makes everything complex. So there's a simplicity in paying attention to your body, paying attention to what's coming up for you. Most people get an inkling that they're on a raft. They know that they're not living fully. I just want you to maybe just be more aware of that, right? And then as you start to become aware, you're going to start to hear a lot of self-contempt or anger at yourself or unkindness. Like, pay attention to that. What is that voice? And then get curious about it. And then don't isolate. Talk to people that you love and let people that you love know that something's there. Yeah. Right? Look, I don't think everybody should just run into therapy, even though I'm a therapist. Sometimes you need, and this is what I love about Christian community, you need a faith community. Like, if there's nothing higher than you, you're in trouble, right? So we need each other as we go through this stuff. And that is enough to hold people up a lot of the time while they go through what they're going to go through.
So talk a little more about that community aspect, because if we've kind of set this out as our collective vision to live out of being loved by God, like how could that look different? Like, what can we do as a community?
Well, just as you were talking, simple. Like, there's something about just listening to someone, right? Like, literally just not worrying about whether they're right or wrong or debating them. I think this culture sucks, actually, around that stuff. So there's a reality of being people who can listen and hold things. I don't know why we're so worried about how other people think so much. Who cares how they think if they don't have a possibility of being loved by someone else, right? One of the things I notice is sometimes people want to get into arguments and present these things just to keep a distance from you, right? So when I think about how Christ is engaging me, he's not trying to change me all the time. Like, he's loving me. And it doesn't mean he doesn't disagree with me, discipline me, whatever, like, fine. But the reality is why are we so wrapped up in truth in a way where we're excluding others? It just blows my mind. And Christ doesn't do that with us.
Yeah. I wanted to just take a minute and see if anybody has anything. It's your free therapy session right here. Not to go too deep, but does anybody have anything they'd like to?
Can I say one thing about that?
Yes.
I'm sad about the therapeutic community because they don't integrate higher power a lot in the way that it's actually, I guess, tangible or accessible. Like, I don't know why we separated the soul and the mind the way that we have. And, in reaction, there's a lot of, within Christianity that's like, well, we're just going to go hyper-biblical, or we're going to go this or that. But, man, psychology and faith I don't see the separation, right? So I just think that whatever God creates and whatever we can find out about that, that just makes me sad. And it takes away from the power of what you do or what this does because, there's experts out there. Well, yeah, there are, and that's awesome. But somehow it's taken away the power of faith and what it actually means in people's lives, and I don't like that. So I try to combat that with what I'm doing. Anyway.
Anybody? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and experience. I just want to say that your presence here today is a specific and striking answer to a prayer. And I'm hoping to be able to talk to you for a minute afterwards.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, Ken.
So I found it hard to share with friends trauma because they can't, I don't know, they can't cope it or whatever. So, when you say, talk to people, I tried that, but it's hard to find someone that actually can handle it.
That's good.
I really agree with you. Yeah. Can I ask a question about that? And I'm sorry about that. What did you find that you were met with when you tried to share with people? If you can share, and if not, I can run with it.
It was just too much.
It was just too much.
Yeah. What I was saying earlier, I think within Christianity there's so much wounding and pain. And there's an answer, and a lot of it, unfortunately, people don't know what to do with pain in general, all of us. We suck at it. And so we say horrible things with well-intentioned meaning, like, gosh, everything works out for the good of those who love him. It does, yeah. But you're sucking right now. Stop doing that. When we carry such heavy things, it makes us uncomfortable that other people are carrying so much pain, and we want to fix it. We want to make it better. There's a good intention around that. But then we do awful human things around that, right? We tell people things that they shouldn't hear. We tell them to pray and read more, which I don't mind praying and reading more. I think we all need to do that. But it's funny, we're not really addressing the problem. And there are times where I've shared with other people and I've found those answers and have experienced those things in my wife and I's life, going through different painful things where people said awful things. I didn't find that praying and reading more actually helped. I was looking for someone that could sit with what I was experiencing. Truly. I think it is more rare, actually. And I also think that's why people are kind of wondering what the hell's going on in Christianity, right? Because we're doing all these things, and it's not connecting to where people are. And literally, like, if someone would listen to you, they can't fix whatever that is. You just want to be seen, right? You want to be known. And we want to offload that because it's just so awful. And the reality is that it plays into this thing that we carry within us, that something's wrong with us. Like, we're worthless or bad, or there's something defective within us. And it proves it because, look, other people can't handle it, or you're different than everybody else. Yeah, I think through the years, facing some of the things that I've had to go through, it's interesting, like when we're on the raft, that's part of our story. So we need to embrace that with people. Because some people are on a raft. Some people are drowning, and we're telling them that, like, look at Jesus with the lamb on his shoulder. Isn't that awesome? No, it's not awesome. Like, I'm drowning. So the reality is Jesus awesome? Of course. Where is that person? And I just find Christ so amazing in terms of the dynamic way he relates to people. The woman who's bleeding, or the woman caught in adultery. Like, I'm just going to put my hands on you. I'm going to love you, like, right here. It's so practical. My wife and I were watching The Chosen last night, where the water turns into wine, right? If they don't have enough wine, the family gets shamed. Like, who cares in the grand scheme of things? Well, apparently God does. In this minute, mundane thing. It just brought tears to my eyes. Like, so I understand not being seen, not being heard. And that's what made me passionate about doing what I'm doing, because I was fortunate enough to have people see me, love me. My wife is graced with skin on. To see, life come out of death. To see my family, my kids, even if they're struggling, so what? Like, it's amazing. I'm living on house money, is how I think about it. And so I don't really care what people think about what I'm saying. Like, but if people hear it and it resonates with them, good. Because my hope is to live out the gospel in a way that exonerates him and makes me less important, if that makes any sense. But I'm so sorry for anyone in here who's ever shared and not been met in that, because it just exacerbates the pain. It intensifies the shame. It isolates you further internally and externally. So what I would say to you is find people who can actually hold it, even if that's just one. And then God will bring those people to you. And there will also be, I don't know if I can say this, there will also be assholes. And that's okay, because Jesus loves them too, but I don't have to, because the part is that they're coming in and they're doing all this stuff with you, and it's awful. So find where you can find that kindness, that accountability, that strength in others, the ability to sit and allow you to suffer without changing it or without judging you. If you can find that person, then that person's probably been in a lot of pain already.
Yeah, that's a good word. That people who have been there or somewhere painful tend to be the safer people.
Yeah, and Jeff, we have to go through our own Gethsemane and Exodus.
Yeah.
We all have to bear our cross, whatever that is. Everyone has a particular cross that they bear in here. And Jesus is there in the midst of that. But it doesn't always feel like that. And for some people, Jesus is nowhere close to that. So the cool part is, as a community, can we be a community that will love people in that way? That will open their hearts, allow for people to struggle, speak into that wall, and not try to fix, not try to change. Yeah. God does a good job of sanctification, from what I understand, and it's not my job. So there's a freedom to that in the reality of I can just join in something and literally just start getting curious, just start being aware, and just listen. Yeah. If you listen long enough, people will tell you their story. If you're compassionate when you meet them, then the possibility of hope and healing, isn't that interesting? Can hope be quantitative, qualitative? Can it grow? Yes. How's God going to do that? Through us.
Yeah.
100%. And so I don't care what the people say about church, because church is a dancing bear show sometimes, right? But the reality is Christ is most powerful in people who are most wounded, and will admit that.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody last week after the service who has really just been through so much, and she was talking about the list of all the audacious things about God's love, and saying, sometimes it's not till we're at those deepest places of pain that we can even really fathom the depth of his love for us. And it was really powerful coming from this person, knowing their story. And I think it is, and it was also really hopeful to go, yeah, it's even in those deep places.
I think that, I just spent a week with veterans who were in Iraq and Mosul and all these different places. Saw horrible things, literally picking up body parts and putting them in bags to bring them home, And what each one of them told me is, that's not the hardest thing I've been through. And they will tell me a story about growing up. So one of the things that I'm starting to think about is, okay, so are we a people who can send a different kind of message? Will we actually be courageous enough to deal with our own pain? Let God inhabit that and experience the relationship and the hope that is there. Because if we can do that, then we'll just be ourselves in front of other people. And we'll quit working so damn hard. And we'll have this theology base, but we'll actually embody it. And I think that's what people need to see, embodied Christ. And I think that, interestingly enough, the only thing that has truly humbled me and allowed me to work with people the way that I do is by meeting Jesus in the middle of my most painful things. Because that's where hope is the strongest. And that's where my strength is the least. And he just holds me. So that's what people really need. They don't need to know what I think and feel all the time. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes it far simpler. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to land today.
Sure.
We've talked, I think we're going to continue this conversation in podcast form that we'll put together and go deeper over a few sessions. So feel free to ask Bill additional questions after the service if you have other things that you'd like to hear him speak into. But thanks so much for being willing to share, and even with your potty mouth, we love you, and it's all good.
I mean, Peter was the same way, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Hey, you can't have this all cleaned up, baby.
Yeah, no, you can't. You can't. So, well, let me pray for us, and then Becky will come and lead us in another song. So, God, I thank you. I thank you for this time, and I thank you for the reminder that pain doesn't have to be a barrier to knowing your love, but it can actually become the place where we see you and feel you and know you if we can sit and wait for you there. And Lord, that's so hard, to be vulnerable, to be feeling the depth of what's so difficult. And so I pray, God, for both healing and freedom and capacity to move past pain, and also, Lord, for the strength to be there and look for you in the fire, as we've talked about. And I thank you for Bill. Thank you for the place you've given him to speak into so many lives. And I thank you for what he's doing. Pray for strength for him as he does that, and discernment. And thank you, God, for this body that you've put us in. And that, Lord, as we seek to live out of being loved, that we can really demonstrate that to each other by holding each other's stories well. Thanks for the reminder of the importance of that, and not over speaking or trying to fix. So, God, we thank you and we love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.